Let me tell you something that you already know. This church, Southside, we are for this city. Over the last several years, God has been reminding us over and over again that we are here for this city. God looked at this city, our city, a city in desperate need of hope and help today, tomorrow, and for generations to come, and He had an idea. And that idea is us. That idea is Southside Church. You know what? It's time that Southside put our foot down in this city and said, we're here today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. We are here and we are for this city. We're for hope. We're for help. We're for more. More has a name, and that name is Jesus. Because of Him, the best is yet to come.
So a few years ago, I read this book called Imagine Heaven. And one of the stories in it was told by a man named Howard Storm. He talked about the fact how on June the 1st of 1985, he had a near-death experience. And when he got back from beyond the brink, I guess, he talked about the fact that he met with Jesus and a number of angels, and together they reviewed his life. This is what he said. He said, "My life was shown in a way that I had never really thought of before. All the things that I had worked to achieve, the recognition that I had worked for in elementary school, in high school, in college, and in my career, they meant nothing in this setting. I could feel their feelings of sorrow and suffering or joy as my life's review unfolded. They didn't say something was bad or good, but I could feel it. And I could sense all those things that they were indifferent to. They didn't, for example, look down on my high school shot put record. They just didn't feel anything towards it, nor towards other things which I had taken so much pride in. What they responded to was how I had interacted with other people. That was the long and short of it. Unfortunately, most of my interactions with other people didn't measure up to how I should have interacted, which was in a loving way. Whenever I did react during my life in a loving way, they rejoiced. Most of the time, I found that my interactions with other people had been manipulative. During my professional career, for example, I saw myself sitting in my office playing the college professor. While a student came to me with a personal problem, I sat there looking compassionate and patient and loving, while inside I was bored to death. I would check my watch under my desk as I anxiously waited for the student to finish. When I was a teenager, my father's career put him into a high-stress, 12-hour-a-day job. Out of my resentment because of his neglect of me, when he came home from work, I would be cold and indifferent towards him. This made him angry, and it gave me further excuse to feel hatred towards him. He and I fought, and my mother would get upset. Most of my life, I had felt that my father was the villain and I was the victim. When we reviewed my life, I got to see how I had precipitated so much of that myself. Instead of greeting him happily at the end of his day, I was continually putting thorns in him in order to justify my hurt. I got to see when my sister had a bad night one night, how I went into her bedroom and put my arms around her, not saying a word. I just lay there with my arms around her. As it turned out, that experience was one of the biggest triumphs of my life. I think about that story all the time. It's one of the most powerful illustrations that I've ever read of the principle of perspective. It's sometimes from the perspective of this planet, things that seem so big and so important aren't as big and as important as we necessarily think they are. And sometimes stuff that we look at and we think it's small and insignificant isn't nearly as small and insignificant as we think that it is. And I guess that's kind of the point of this series, isn't it? This series called More. We're talking about the fact that like a mission isn't a trip, it's a life. And not just any kind of life, but a big life, and an open-handed life. But if we're going to talk about the fact that we don't want to settle for small and we want to move towards more, I guess we need to decide what is small and what is more. And that's a matter of perspective. So we've been walking through this passage in 2 Corinthians 9, section by section, asking ourselves, how do we move to more? And so last week we talked about the fact that we need to have a pure heart, a clear head, and a steady hand. And today we're going to continue. Paul says this, when we're telling the truth and God's showing his power, when we're doing our best setting things right, when we're praised and when we're blamed, slandered and honored, true to our word though distrusted, ignored by the world but recognized by God, terrifically alive though rumored to be dead, beaten within an inch of our lives but refusing to die, immersed in tears yet always filled with deep joy, living on handouts yet enriching many, having nothing, having it all. We're telling the truth and God's showing his power. What are we doing? Oh, we're telling the truth and God's showing his power. That's it. There's immense power in truth. What you believe to be true, what you know to be true, will radically impact your identity, your relationships, and your destiny. Even if someone says to you, there is no such thing as objective truth. What's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. I always ask them this, is the fact that there is no truth true for you or true for you and me? Even if you don't believe that there is any truth, the fact that you think that's true will radically impact your identity, your relationships, and your destiny. There's this 17th century Scottish activist by the name of Andrew Fletcher, and he said this, let me make the songs of the nation. I care not who makes its laws. Let me make the songs of the nation. I care not who makes its laws. You get what he's saying, right? Like what he's saying is like, if you let me write the music that goes deep inside of somebody, then it convinces them what is true and what is not true. And if I can establish that at their core, you can make whatever laws you want. I will impact the person more than the person who's making the laws. Truth. It's a big deal. We're telling the truth and God's showing his power. See, because truth will impact your identity, your relationships, and your destiny. So what's the truth that we're telling here at Southside Church? One of the ways that I've heard people describe the truth that we're telling is the gospel. The gospel. It's funny, actually. The word gospel means good news, which is interesting because in our culture, I would suggest that the gospel is a little more complicated than that, and it's a little more controversial than that. Because the gospel actually starts out with some bad news, and then it gets to the good news. So here's what the gospel says. It's a bad news, good news story. Here's the bad news. You need to be saved. That's the bad news. You need to be saved. Let me explain it this way. You don't have a soul. You are a soul. You have a body. Your body's going to wear out one day, but you're never going to wear out. You're a lot deeper than your body, right? You're a lot deeper than your physique or your athleticism. You are a soul. You have a mind. Your mind is actually going to wear out one day, but you're never going to wear out. Well, you're a lot deeper than your mind. You're a lot deeper than your IQ and your GPA and even your creative genius. You're a soul. In other words, what I'm saying is your identity is primarily spiritual. You're spiritual. And you need to be saved. Because you were born into a spiritually broken world. And at the core of who you are, spiritually speaking, you are broken. You're broken. There's a relationship between you and God that should be there, but it's broken. And because of that, you're hurting. Spiritually speaking, you're empty. There's a fulfillment that you want, but you can't find. You need to be saved. That's bad news. And I'll give you a second piece of bad news since you asked for it. Here's the second piece of bad news. You can't save yourself. You can't save yourself. There's a line in the American Declaration of Independence that I think about a lot because I'm weird and I'm a history major. But it says this, we hold these truths to be, yeah, that's right. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I would suggest that when I tell you the truth, today, and I tell you that you need to be saved and you can't save yourself, I would suggest that those truths are self-evident. Because you're spiritual. In other words, real life, true life, truth in life is this. It's lived from the inside out. So spiritually speaking, if there's something broken on the inside, you can't fix it on the outside. But yet we live in this physical world. You can't save yourself, but we try sometimes. And we try to use outside things to fix what's broken on the inside of us, right? We try sex or money or pleasure or vacations or medals or trophies or prestige or power or success. And there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. The only problem arises when you suggest to yourself or when you live your life as if that outside stuff is somehow going to fix you on the inside, but it doesn't work that way because real life is lived from the inside out. We hold these truths to be self-evident. So what's the bad news? Oh, the bad news is you need to be saved. And you can't save yourself. But the good news is gooder than the bad news is bad. So here's the good news of the gospel. Jesus can save you. Jesus will save you. Have you ever thought about that word, by the way? Will. Jesus will save you. Will. The word will. It means he wills to save you. There's a story in the Gospels about a man who has leprosy. In that culture at that time, leprosy was a horrific skin condition. And someone with leprosy was considered untouchable. Like no one would get near them, let alone touch them. Because it was contagious and you just didn't want to get near them. And if you got close to them, you would be untouchable like they were untouchable. And this man with leprosy walks up to Jesus and he says this, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." And the Bible says that Jesus was overwhelmed by compassion. And he answered, "I am willing." He touched the man, said, "You're clean." I wonder, by the way, how many of you today, how many people sitting here today, you feel unclean? I want to tell you something. Jesus can save you. But more than that, Jesus wills to save you. Jesus will save you. He's overwhelmed with compassion for you. So the truth is, it doesn't matter who you are or where you've been or what you've done or what's been done to you. Jesus loves you right now, wants to save you right now. All you need to do is ask. That's the gospel. So if someone ever asks you, "What are you doing in that church, Southside? What are you guys up to?" Oh, it's really, really simple. We're just telling the truth. And God's just showing his power. That's us. Because the gospel is the hope of history. You notice how I didn't say it's a hope of history. It is the hope. It's the hope for my family. It's the hope for your family. It's the hope for this city. Years ago, somebody asked Larry King. Some people consider Larry King the greatest interviewer of all time. But somebody asked Larry King, if you could interview one person from history and ask them one question, who would that one person be and what would that one question be? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, the one person would be Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and the one question would be, were you indeed virgin born? Because Larry King said, if I got the answer to that question, the answer to that question for me would frame history. A couple years ago, the theologian Ravi Zacharias was thinking about that Larry King quote as he was about to preach in a church in Puerto Rico. I'll read you what he wrote. Just before we went into the sanctuary, my eyes caught a glimpse of a painting on the wall of the pastor's office. It was a picture of a little girl holding the hand of Jesus, even as he tenderly gazed at her. She was clasping his hands as she asked, "¿Qué pasó con tus manos?" What happened to your hands? That question carries Larry King's question to a more profound level. The virgin birth may only prove that naturalism cannot explain the world's existence, that God has supernaturally intervened in history. In a supernatural framework, that's possible. But what happened to your hands answers what it takes to rescue this life of mine from self-serving intellect or from self-glorifying moralizing to others, and brings me to a place from which I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. It buries the self that seeks the self and brings to birth the fullest person that God has so uniquely endowed. That is to say, in the cross, I find my definitive loss that I might obtain my greatest gain. What happened to your hands? That's the question. That's the question. What happened to your hands? It's the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 5 answered that by saying, Jesus Christ, who knew no sin, became sin so that we could become right with God. That's what happened to his hands. Jesus was nailed to a cross through his hands and his feet. We hold these truths to be self-evident. See, life is lived from the inside out. Jesus came to save you from the inside out. Here's what I mean. So, if life really is lived from the inside out, if there's a brokenness deep down inside of me, eventually it comes out. And that's why you've maybe heard me say this before, that broken people break people. If there's a hurt inside of me that I can't heal on my own, eventually it manifests out there. And now hurting people hurt people. Listen to this. If there's an emptiness inside of me, it always comes out. Here's what I mean. I might be looking around in my life for some other person, for a spouse, for a child, for a best friend to fill what is empty inside of me. But two empty people can't fill each other up. So empty people leave others empty. What happened to your hands? Jesus' body was broken on the cross so that I could be made whole. Jesus was hurt so I could be healed. And in that moment on the cross, Jesus was empty of his divinity so I could be full. What do you do at that church? We're just telling the truth. And God just keeps showing his power. That's it. See, the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. Jesus can save you. Jesus will save you. All you need to do is ask. And then what? And then what do you spend the rest of your life doing? The rest of your life is now spent telling the truth. And God just keeps showing his power. Do you get it? The rest of your life is spent preaching the gospel. And sometimes you might even use words. What do? Individually and collectively, what do? We just keep telling the truth. Because the truth will set you free. The truth will change you. It'll change the way you husband. It'll change the way you wife. It'll change the way you friend. It'll change the way you give. It'll change the way you trust. It'll change the way you're kind. It'll change the way you're patient. It'll change the way you neighbor. It'll change the way you work. It'll change you completely. It'll even change the way you talk. And so what do we spend the rest of our lives doing? We just keep telling the truth. In word and in deed, in love and in hope. And he just keeps showing his power. What's your church all about? We just tell the truth. And God just keeps showing his power. Paul continues. He goes through all these contradictions. It's interesting. He says, we're terrifically alive, though rumored to be dead. Beaten within an inch of our lives, but refusing to die. Immersed in tears, yet always filled with deep joy. Living on handouts, yet enriching many. And then he summarizes the whole thing by saying, having nothing, having it all. Well, which one is it? Yes. Yes, it is. That's perspective. That's perspective, because sometimes the stuff that we think is everything from the perspective of this planet, there's moments that we realize it's really no big thing. And sometimes the stuff that we treat as if it was nothing is really everything. It's funny, if you talk to somebody who's gone on a missions trip to a third world country, almost invariably, they'll say the same thing. Number one, I had a great time. It was amazing. It just felt so good to help other people, you know? And they'll also tell you about how when they got to a third world country, something interesting happened to their perspective. That suddenly they were there in that third world nation and they realized that so much that we think is such a big deal in this culture isn't really that big a deal at all. And I don't really think it's an indictment of our culture as much as it is the clarity that comes from simplicity. And I was thinking to myself, but if a mission isn't a trip, if a mission is a life, what if we could live with that clarity? Like what if we could really know that big things are actually big things and little things are actually little things? What if we could live that way? Because we've all been there, right? It's not always a mission trip. Sometimes it's a moment. And we get this clarity. Last week, Maddie's mom, Charla, came up and spoke, and she was speaking on video, and she talked a little bit about October 11th of 2018. When Maddie was diagnosed with cancer, and then I told you last week also that Monday was her last chemo. And on that day, Corinne wrote something, and I'll read it to you now. October 11th, 2018. Every few minutes, the front door would open and someone who loved Maddie would come in. Face wet with tears, eyes glazed in shock, hands trembling. We sat in my living room, no one speaking. The words cancer and terminal were too loud to talk over. We crammed into cars and we headed to the hospital to be with our friend, wondering how we could go on without her, knowing that the sun would shine a little less brightly on a world without Maddie in it. Doctors and nurses kept commenting on the crowd in Maddie's room. One even asking if we were a sports team or something. It was unusual for them to see friendship and love like this, but not for us because it was Maddie, and we couldn't really do anything else but be with her. That terrible day passed, and the next day dawned, and with it came miracles. The word terminal was never again heard, replaced by treatable and beatable. And we all stood amazed. We stood amazed at our friend's grace and strength. We stood amazed at our God's kindness and power. In truth, I think we are all still standing amazed. Amazed at how love and pain and fear and hope are interwoven into this life. Amazed at how fragile we are and how steadfast is our Savior's love for us. Amazed at how even as the world is breaking all around us, through all of the cracks that form, some light still gets through. And it's this light, shining into all the dark corners, that warms us and helps us grow. There's a clarity, man. There's a clarity that comes in simplicity. It can happen in a moment. It can happen in a trip. It can happen with a phone call. It can happen with the word terminal. And all of a sudden you realize in that moment, right, that some of the stuff that you thought was so big isn't as big as you thought it was, and some of the stuff that you thought was really small is way bigger. I think it was Jim Elliot who said, he is no fool who gives what he can't keep to gain what he can never lose. That's a life on mission. And I was just thinking to myself, like, if we can get clarity on a missions trip, what if our life was a mission? Could we begin to live with that kind of clarity? Because if we did, I think we would get it. I think that we would know if someone asked us, what are you guys doing here? We would say, we're telling the truth, and God's showing his power. Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, we love him so much, and we love each other to the best of our ability. We're there. We support each other. We help each other. We pray for one another, and we love this city. Oh, we're not perfect, but we're here, right? We're here today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. We just want to help. We just want to bring hope. Like, I wonder what it would be like to live a life on mission. Well, then I think it would just be clear. My purpose and yours, we just keep telling the truth. Sometimes we use words, but mostly it's just with our life and our love and our kindness. We just keep telling the truth, and God will just keep showing his power. So we're in this 2-year expanded vision. More hope, more help, more home. Just telling the truth. God's just showing his power. And the goal is $6 million. Someone asked me the other day, do you know how much $6 million is? I don't know, roughly. I think about it roughly 7,000 times a day. So yeah, he's like, no, you don't get it. So he started doing the math for me. Well, if 2,500 people consider Southside Church their home, but then how many of those are kids? And I kind of lost him a little bit. Like I stopped paying attention. I started doing my own math, and I started 6 million divided by 2,500 people, sine, cosine, tangent, x equals, and I came up with an answer. I came up with an answer. It equals this: sacrifice. That's the answer to the equation. The answer to the equation is sacrifice. I'm just telling the truth. God's just showing his power. Bill Gates don't go here. So they gave us this commitment card a long time ago, and Corinne and I have been looking at it. It's a little bit intimidating. You can throw it up there if you want. Just so you know, there's things written under the blanks. Can you read them? Can you read what's written under the blanks? Okay, because I can't. Okay, because I'm old. All right? So I'm going to summarize to the best of my ability what it says, but it won't be what it says there, so please don't judge me. Okay? So the first blank roughly says, how much do you give right now? I found that pretty intimidating. Let me tell you a quick story. Years ago when I became a pastor, one of my mentors, a guy named Dave Hubert, took me aside. He said, Mike, you need to understand something. Being a pastor of a church is a lot different than being a coach of a team. He said, being a coach of a team, you can blow the whistle and other people do stuff. He said, when you're a pastor, you know what you are? You're a shepherd. So you lead up front. Oh. So that means, like, if you say, we need to sacrifice, that means you go first. Oh, okay. So we looked at that first blank, and it was like, ugh. Because we love this church. I'm not trying to pretend we're Christian superstars or anything, but we try to give sacrificially all the time. Because then the second blank says, well, what's the name of this 2-year expanded vision again? It's right on the screen. Yeah, more. Don't you love when I do that? Put people on the spot and they don't know the answer right out. Yeah, I do that to you all the time, don't I, man? Okay, anyways, don't change the subject right now. So the second is like, well, what are you going to give over and above what you're already giving? And for Corinne and I, we had to really think about that. And then I came up with an idea. It's a great idea. I said, Corinne, we're going to sell our SUV and we're going to give the money to the campaign over and above what we normally give. Some of you know that because those of you involved in auto sales, I asked you 5,000 to 6,000 questions to make sure that I did it just the right way, okay? And so because we got kids getting older, moving out and getting their own vehicles, so we're like, okay, we're sell the SUV. So I had it on sale for 3 months. Do you know how many inquiries I got? 0. Ish. Now I did get one guy called me. And he said, how many seats does it have? And I said 7, which I thought was a really reasonable and nice answer, and he hung up on me. So that was the end of my 3 months. But I got to tell you something. At the end of 3 months, it just wasn't selling. And I was so stoked. I was so happy because I love my SUV. No, I do. I love it. And I'm like, well, I tried, God, you know. Gave it the college try. And so I was stoked that the SUV wouldn't sell. And so then 3 days later, God spoke to Corinne and I basically on the same day, same time, and said, oh, you know what you were going to give if you sold your SUV? Yeah, just give that anyways. Yeah, but it didn't sell. Yeah. it's that sine, cosine, tangent thing. What's the answer again? Sacrifice. Oh. So we had to change our lifestyle a little bit. Yeah. That's right. I'm going to explain it a little bit more at 4 o'clock today, but there's a song been going through my head. The band played it today. And it's a song where it says, I believe that, oh, no, I'm getting the lines wrong. I've seen you move. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'm going to see it again. I keep thinking about that because he's never failed me. You understand what I mean? He's never failed me. So I'm stoked. I'm excited. So what I ask you is, let's go. Maybe your top blank right now of the thing that was gone like 5 minutes ago and I still pointed to it as if it was still there, that thing. Maybe your top blank right now is 0. It's fine. Man, I'm so pumped you're here. What a great time to consider, hey, maybe now is the time to jump in and help. One last story and then I'll shut up. Another mission trip. 2008, Corinne and I led this team of young adults down to Haiti. And by the way, if you've gone to Haiti over the last couple of years and you've stayed at that hotel in Mirabel, I just need you to know that you basically are staying at the Ritz-Carlton compared to where we stayed back then. No, I'm serious. We stayed at like the Haiti Children's Home Orphanage, which has since moved to a much newer, nicer place. I believe that building has now been condemned. In Haiti. Okay? That's where we stayed. So we're there, and there was this shower room in the basement, and the shower room was basically this like concrete rectangle with a garden hose that came over the top, but it was okay. It was like 42 degrees every day. It was fine. Cold water. The problem with the shower room, though, is it was just filled with cockroaches all the time. Okay, so like just so many of them. And so Corinne wanted to have a shower one night, and she brought a girl from the team down with her to clear out the cockroaches with her. Okay, so they get down to the shower room to clear out cockroaches, but there was none there. It's awesome. Good news, right? No cockroaches. So Corinne's like, awesome, great. And so the girl left, and as the girl was leaving, Corinne closed the door. And as the door swung closed, there was a rat clutching by its claws onto the back of the door. Isn't that awesome? And then the door shut, and the impact of the door shutting, like the rat fell onto the floor, looked back at Corinne, like squished itself onto the ground. You know how rats can kind of do that? And slid under the door. To say that Corinne's scream was blood-curdling in that moment would be a great understatement. What does that have to do with anything, you ask? Nothing at all. But it is a funny story, correct? Yes. So we're on this trip, and we're staying at the orphanage, and every day we're just doing work around the orphanage. But in the morning, we take all the school-aged kids from the orphanage to school. And by the way, it was on this trip that we first got a chance to meet Beds and Samuel, which is just incredible. But we would walk the kids to school, and then in the afternoon we would go and we would walk them home again. And on one of the last days of the trip, I noticed that as we were walking the kids to school, there was a lot of kids in the neighborhood that didn't have uniforms on, and all the kids that go to school in Haiti all have uniforms. And so I asked our interpreter, I'm like, why aren't these neighborhood kids in their uniforms for school? He said, oh, they don't go to school. So what do you mean? He said, oh, no, it costs money to go to school in Haiti. And they don't have any. And I asked him another question. I said, how come so many of these kids in the neighborhood have red hair? So these beautiful black kids from Haiti with red hair. He said, oh, that's because of the malnutrition. So we got together as a team and we said, we can't do everything, but we got to do something. So we set a goal, and the goal was that we wanted to start a school in Haiti. And that school would be a free school. You didn't have to pay to go there. And then also that every student that went to the school would get lunch every day. And so we came home and we started planning, and we realized that to set up the infrastructure for the school was going to be about $100,000 US. So we recruited another team to go back to Haiti. There was about 10 of us in total, Corinne and I and a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds. And I said to them, hey, we need $100,000 US. We got to raise that. And so you know what they did? They raised it. A bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. $100,000. How? Oh, they were just telling the truth. And God was just showing his power. See, it's the clarity that comes with simplicity, right? Like, here's the goal, let's do it. Something I want to tell you. Oh, and by the way, that school that we started, that little, one grade school, it's still around, by the way. Except it's just grown by one grade every year, and now there's almost 600 kids that go to that school. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I want to ask you something. If life is lived from the inside out, you get it, right? That the needs in Chilliwack are as real as the needs in Haiti? That there are people in this city desperately hungry for help and hope? There are people in this city today, tomorrow, and for generations to come, and they need to know the truth. And here it is. You need to be saved. You can't save yourself. But Jesus can. And Jesus will. All you got to do is ask. So, what are we all about? Oh, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to keep telling the truth. And God's just going to keep showing his power today, tomorrow, and for the generations to come. I love you guys a lot. See you this afternoon or next week.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love to see you at any of our 3 Sunday services held at Sardis Secondary School on Stevenson Road in Chilliwack, British Columbia. For more information, please visit southsidelife.com.